Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another community talk. My name is Kenyetta. I am here on behalf of the Good Life Outcomes program, or GLOW program, brought to you by Change Happens. And GLOW, the purpose is to bring awareness, advocacy, and action to the issues of social justice, education, and health. Today, I will be speaking with Chassidy Olainu-Alade, who is the coordinator of community engagement at Fort Bend ISD. And she is a lifetime social studies educator and historian. And our topic today is going to be the Sugarland 95, which is a mass grave that was found at a site that was going to become a school. And so she is going to speak with us today about that. And so without further ado, I'm going to open up the floor for you to further introduce yourself and the topic at hand.
Hi, Kenyetta. Thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be able to talk about the Sugarland 95 discovery on behalf of Fort Bend ISD. As you mentioned, I'm a longtime social studies educator. I started my career as an eighth grade U.S. history teacher in Fort Bend ISD for several years, for about 8 years, and then I jumped in on the curriculum side of things. I was the social studies curriculum coordinator at the time of the discovery. And so when I refer to the discovery in 2018, Fort Bend ISD was in the process of constructing our James Reese Career Technical Center, which is like state-of-the-art CTE center. And it was during the process of that construction early on when the backhoe operator ran across the first remains. And that was February 19th, 2018. And so that sort of was the signal of like, what do we have here? And I said, I was just the curriculum coordinator watching it on the news like everyone else. But since then, when your purpose meets your passion, I've had the opportunity to sort of assist the district in developing a long-term strategy on how we properly memorialize the site as the historic site that it is, but also how do we advance education and outreach to make sure that our students, our community, and our staff are aware of the discovery and the historical significance of it.
Right. And so how does this being found at the site of a school, how has that impacted, the response and how you move forward with trying to memorialize the discovery?
So you know what, Kenyatta? This has been a journey since the discovery with lots of twists and turns. And my involvement um, has a different sort of ebb and flow than maybe someone else who's been involved, right? And so early on, you can only imagine we're a public school district. And so the notion of a public school district finding a historic discovery is somewhat like unprecedented, right? And so early in the process, I'd say maybe the first 2 years, it was really a lot of challenges in figuring out what are the roles and responsibilities of the school district, what are the legal implications of having a cemetery, and then how do we advance the work in a manner that is respectful and in a dignified way that the community around us is receptive of. And so we've had to navigate all of those pieces. But with that, one of the things that has been sort of a universal understanding here in the district is that Fort Bend ISD, being a public school district, being the owners of the property where the discovery was found is very serendipitous. We see it more as an opportunity than an obstacle. It's very advantageous that a school district in the most diverse community in the nation would be the owners of the property where the historic discovery occurred, because it really is aligned with our goal of making sure that all of our communities have equal representation, and we really embrace diversity, which includes the history of the population of people who live here. And so we viewed it as an opportunity to sort of shed light on not only portion of African American history, but as a portion of American history as a whole that's really sort of been left out of the broader narrative of what we necessarily cover in a K-12 setting.
Yeah, and I don't know how far you are in coming up with this plan, but could you give me some insight to where you are and some of the discussion about what, the next steps are as far as making sure that this is respected and, used properly with the community.
Absolutely. And so we actually have a long-term strategic plan for the Sugarland 95 memorialization project. The plan is rooted in three main goals. Obviously, as a K-12 institution, education is our number one goal. And that is, it's anchored in how do we properly educate and equip students and staff to learn and to teach others about this particular topic in history. Our second goal is community engagement and outreach. We understand that this is not a Fort Bend ISD discovery. It doesn't belong to us. It's more of a communal discovery. And so we put systems in place to engage community stakeholders. That's been a little challenging with COVID, but we're right on the heels of being able to ramp some of those efforts up. And then also we have memorialization. How do we properly acknowledge, preserve, and restore the site as the cultural resource that it is in our community? And so all of the work that we engage in as a district aligns to one or more of those goals. There's no one single project that really falls in one bucket. They kind of cross over. So I'll kind of start with education because obviously as a K-12 institution, that's been our primary focus. So early on in the process, even when I was in the curriculum department as the social studies coordinator, we knew like, well, they're saying this is a historic discovery, there's historic implications. Let's look at the history curriculum that we currently teach and see where it is. And it wasn't there. And so that sparked us to do some internal work here in the district to say, well, if we have this historic discovery, how do we incorporate it into our history courses? And that led in the work of Fort Bend adopting a local standard, which the local standard we adopted isn't specifically related to Sugarland 95. It's really specifically written that students will engage in inquiry to learn about local history. And that was important to craft it that way at the time because we only knew a fraction of the history at that time. It took us about 2.5 years to get our final report of findings. So we wanted to make the standard something that had life to it, right? That as we discovered new things, we can add more layers. And so that standard allows us to study local history, but particularly the Sugarland 95 and the system of convict leasing in the curriculum where students would learn about other topics related to it. So for example, in Texas history, when they're learning about Reconstruction, right, they're going to learn about the system of convict leasing in the Sugarland 95. In US history, same thing. It kind of, it's Reconstruction, it crosses over into the pre-Jim Crow, progressive era. So there's multiple opportunities for them to really study the discovery in the curriculum where it currently exists, aligned with the state standards. So that was the first thing that we did for education, was making sure we had opportunities to insert it into the curriculum. And then we started creating resources to go along with that. So teachers have materials to use when teaching it. The Sugarland 95 webpage has been the primary resource. We've been storing a lot of those materials, so teachers have a go-to place to find information, content, historical images, things of that nature to help teach students. As a teacher myself, the district, we developed a keynote presentation and sort of like a professional development session that, I mean, I've probably been to over a dozen school districts and presented at a good half dozen conferences all the way nationally to educators to talk to them about the discovery of the Sugarland 95 and to teach them how to teach the topic in a manner that's age appropriate and respectable for the system of convict leasing. So we've done a lot with education. Some of that crossover, we're really excited because in February we will be unveiling our Sugarland 95 exhibit. So over the course of the past 18 months, we've been working to develop a museum quality exhibit. It's beautiful. And so that exhibit will be available for students who engage in tours at the Reese Center, which is the school adjacent to the cemetery. But it also will be available for public access, and they can make reservations on the Sugarland 95 website if they would like to see the exhibit and engage in a cemetery site tour. So you can start to see how we're kind of moving along that progression from education to community engagement. And then in March, we will be kicking off our memorialization project, which is to outfit this cemetery and the lands surrounding it into an outdoor learning area where we plan to revitalize the cemetery to give it a more dignified and honorable look. We hope that the Texas Historical Commission will support our application to receive a historical marker that we can actually put there. And then we've actually contracted Mass Design Group. They're the firm who is responsible for designing the Equal Justice Initiative's Memorial for Peace and Justice. So they will be coming here in March to help us kick off our community engagement and our visualization of what the outside cemetery space could look like and how that space might feel and really sort of bring community into the area. So we've got a lot going on.
Yeah, that sounds so good. One of the things I want to go back and touch on, just because you and I both know, kind of we've done the research on this, but for people tuning in that may not know about the convict leasing and the importance, can you just give a little bit on that history and the importance of finding this discovery?
Absolutely. So that's the miraculous part about it, right? Most people who study American history or even African American history, we sort of have this dissected timeline where now in hindsight, right, you realize that we actually have gaps on that timeline. So I'm a longtime historian. I mean, I went to Texas Southern. I got a master's degree in history and secondary social studies. And so when this discovery happened, and it took a while before they really came out and said what they had and the history associated with the site. But when I started to hear the term convict leasing, I was like, I don't recall much about convict leasing from my studies, my graduate level studies or undergraduate studies. I actually reached out to one of my former professors at TSU, Dr. Petrie, and I said, this is what we have here in Fort Bend. She goes, oh yeah, it's in one of my books. You remember? And then I remembered us having a discussion about the prison lease system in our graduate studies classes. But at that point, I hadn't made the connection because the timeline was off. We learned about the prison lease system in a much later time period, right? And so when the discovery of the Sugarland 95 took place and more information started to become available and the researchers were really starting to put out what they had found, it was like, wow, right? The average person, their understanding of post-Civil War is that, okay, Civil War ended 1865, slavery was over, 1865, emancipation came, then there's the little gap, Juneteenth, comes and we have the enslaved people finding out they're free here in Texas. And then we kind of just progress, right? In the history books, there's like a huge gap. You go from like the end of slavery, talk about Reconstruction, and there's all the questions of was it a failure, was it a success? And then we kind of jump into like the progressive era. And in some cases, they jump to closing the Western frontier. And so there's always this lingering question like, well, what is going on with the newly enslaved? And so a lot of people have misconceptions that, all was well. And so when we start looking at the system of convict leasing, what we are now aware of is the fact that when emancipation took place, the 13th Amendment says that, slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States except as punishment of a crime where both parties have been duly convicted. And so when you look at that exception clause, that says a whole lot, right? It says that yes, slavery is abolished, but if you're convicted of a crime, then legally you could still remain as an enslaved person, or you could be enslaved if you were a free person. And so when you really study that amendment, it's sort of a game changer in really understanding the fate that the newly freed people were met with in the years following emancipation. And that's exactly what the historical records support and corroborate, right? Is that many of the newly freed people following, emancipation weren't even necessarily free. They never really got their status of freedom because in many cases, they were arrested for vagrancy. Vagrancy was one of the number one offenses. Vagrancy essentially means like you are unemployed. And so what we see is a high number of individuals being incarcerated, with the charge being that they were vagrants. We also see theft as a common charge. And a lot of times people say theft, well, if you steal, you should pay a penalty. But then when you look at what's happening at the time, which is really important, especially as a historian, you always have to go back and look at what's happening at that particular time. Why would theft be such a highly penalized action? Folks as high up on the ranks as Frederick Douglass wrote manuscripts about the convict labor system and saying like, you have 4 million individuals set free in the world and with nothing, right? No preparations made for them. And so you think of why would charging someone with theft be highly penalized? Well, because it was a common practice, because you have this newly freed populace that don't really even have two nickels to rub together, or a loaf of bread, or shoes on their feet. And so this notion that there was a flip in dynamics. As an enslaved person, you were someone's asset. Someone paid for you, so they were compelled to feed you, clothe you, provide shelter, medical attention should they need, because you were an asset. And the historical records show that when they did people's property appraisals, listing of human property was part of a person's appraisal. Where you see after the war, the newly freed people had no value in that sense, right? Their value wasn't documented as part of someone's property. So we see that theft of property like is now a high priority. So theft of farm animals, horses, agricultural tools. I mean, anything over the value of $20, you were sentenced to a 5-year prison sentence. And so that essentially is what convict leasing is. And it wasn't unique to Texas. It was by and large implemented in almost all southern states, and many of the northern corporations actually benefited from the labor that was taking place, whether it was a sugarcane plantation, a cotton plantation, whether it was rice plantations. We have coal mines in Tennessee. In Atlanta, Georgia, the Chattahoochee Brickyard they used convict laborers to build the bricks that essentially rebuilt Atlanta following the burning of Atlanta during the Civil War. And so we see this was a full-on way for the South to sort of rebuild and then be reunified with the North following the Civil War. So we're talking about a 40-year gap in history that most people are unaware of. So we go from emancipation to convict leasing. Then we see the rise of Jim Crow in the progressive era, which kind of are parallel to one another.
Thank you for providing that history. Is very interesting. The way that that's typically, taught is, you're right, we skip right over, some major developments so that we can see how this progressed. And my next question is, I think, so as far as Fort Bend ISD, you've taken the history and you've applied it to current events and you're looking at the future. So I want to get your ideas on how, just knowing this history, knowing about convict leasing, knowing about Sugarland 95, how is it that, as, not only just Texas, but as a community, as a society, as the US as a whole, how can we look at these things and apply them to our current events and apply them to where we need to go in the future? If you have any ideas on that.
That's a great question. And I want to kind of start it with the second part of your previous question, was like, why is this discovery so important? Well, convict leasing as a topic is a new topic. It's what we call a lesser known topic in US history. And this discovery of the cemetery is actually a first of its kind. It is the first convict labor cemetery to have been located, identified, excavated, and recorded, right? And so according to historical record, for every convict labor camp, there are approximately 2 to 3 burial sites. And nationally, we have one, which is the Sugarland 95. And so the Sugarland 95 discovery sort of, it is the gateway of teaching and learning about this lesser known topic in American history, which it's one of those topics that it's like, when you learn about it, there's so many natural connections that take place, like so many light bulb moments, right? And so that's the beauty of teaching and learning about this topic. And as a history teacher, I am a huge proponent in teaching about cause and effect and allowing your students or your audience to really think critically about the history, right? Because that's the purpose. History is a lesson. The purpose of learning about history is kind of twofold. A, you learn about history to be able to understand how the past influenced the present, but then you also study history to help give you a guide on how to move in the future. And so the problem that we run into is that when we don't truly know or understand history, it makes a lot of the things that happen today seem very disconnected and like by matter of fact. But then also, when we don't study and learn history, we potentially set ourselves up for repeating some of the things that happened in the past. And so I think it's really important that, we stop and take a look at this system because there are so many um, connections, right? There are so many connections to things we see in modern times. I mean, we could all come up with a list, right? But what I like to do is actually when I teach this, I really don't try to tell people what the connections are. I wait for them to kind of share, like, wait, now that I know this, I understand this. And I have had so many people come back with feedback after the fact and say, you taught about the history of convict leasing, and it led me to do 2 weeks worth of research, or it led me to watch these documentaries, or led me to do this and do that. And so that's really the beauty of teaching about the topic and providing just the raw history because people don't know it, right? And when you know better, you do better. And so that's really the goal, is making sure that people have access to this content so they can start to say like, wow, we didn't know this happened, but now that we know this happened, how can we apply that knowledge to be able to address some of the injustices of today that may be a direct result of these injustices in the past? And that's all part of it, right? It's making sure that we don't ever have to repeat any of these systems and that we can truly progress and move forward. So that's really my hope, is that as we teach about it, as we expose more people to the history of it, it allows them to walk away not only feeling aware, but inspired to kind of be part of something. And I think when dealing with kids, that's what they all say. They say like, wow, this is like history in action. This is living history, and we get to be part of something. And so really getting people to understand, like, now that you know this, that's actually one of the questions that I pose when I present is, how does knowing new information or having new sources of information impact your understanding of history? How does it also impact your understanding of the present? And I just kind of let people run with that. And it's a beauty to see. It inspires people to take action.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that was really good. I those are all the questions that I have. I just want to open the floor in case you have any additional thoughts or comments you want to make, to go ahead and use this time for that.
Awesome. Yeah. As I mentioned, the work has just begun, although it'll be 4 years on February 19th since the discovery. So we like to celebrate it. Obviously, it's February, it's Black History Month. So we feel like, again, it's very serendipitous, right? But even though it's been 4 years, we're really just kind of at the tip of the iceberg in seeing all what can and will be done with this project. We've had some glitches along the way, whether, COVID is 2 years in, posed a lot of obstacles specifically as a K-12 institution. But we're just at the cusp, and so we have a lot to offer. I always, shameless plug, am available to come out and do any sort of community engagement or to share this history with others who are interested. We do have a presentation. I enjoy working with educators. I go into classrooms all over the place to share the history, and I'm always met with such, great feedback from the kids that they had an eye-opening experience. And so that's always available as well. But on the flip side, once we kind of cross this threshold with COVID and we get over some of those hurdles, the district fully intends to sort of open our doors and welcome folks who have a vested interest to come out, whether it's a cemetery site visit. The site is open for the public daily. I believe it opens at 3 p.m. each afternoon until sundown. And then on the weekends, it's open from sunup to sundown for individuals who want to go out to the cemetery to pay their respects. And the exhibit, like I said, will be opening in February, sort of a soft opening with the hopes that come March, after we get some reports on COVID and we see numbers sort of go down a bit. In the spring, we have more outdoor space available. We hope to be able to open the exhibit up for public tours. With that, I like to drive traffic to our website because the Sugarland 95 website is where we make announcements and we put updates. We also have a living timeline so people can see how this has unfolded over the course of the past 4 years. And there's also FAQs if anyone has any questions. So that's www.fortbendisd.com/Sugarland95. That's how they can find all the information related to Sugarland 95, and they can get contact information to request more to be provided for them. And that is what we aim to do. We are here to educate and to make sure that the discovery earns its rightful place in history. But more importantly, we want to make sure that the individuals whose remains are buried there are honored and memorialized in the future. With that, that leads to a natural question folks typically have is like, so where are you in the process of that work, the DNA work? There is a nonprofit organization called the Principal Research Group. They are the researchers, archaeologists, all the people with big titles that I can't pronounce, who compiled all of the data and the archival research and put it into the final report of the Sugarland 95 discovery. It's titled Back to Bondage. That is also on our Sugarland 95 website. You can access it in PDF. Those individuals formed a group to advance the work of DNA analysis and ongoing genealogical studies. So again, they're the Principal Research Group. We do link to them on our district webpage. So that way individuals who have an interest in possibly whether it's donating or getting updates, or if anyone thinks that they may even be related to someone who's buried at the site, we put them in touch with the Principal Research Group and they sort of take it from there. And so they're a phenomenal group of individuals who are dedicated to this work. So dedicated that after their contract ended with the school district, that they formed their own nonprofit to be able to advance the work. And so I commend them for all the work that they do. And we have a lot of other resources on the website, such as we have an executive summary of that final report. The final report is like 550 pages long. So if you need a shorter read, we have an executive summary on the website, and it also includes the roster of the deceased, which is approximately 71 names of individuals that the archival research shows were arrested and sentenced to work on that particular property, and that they passed away while being on that property. And so our hope is that eventually we'll be able to corroborate some of the names with the remains to be able to have matches. And so that work is ongoing. We don't have any announcements just yet, but that we hope to soon.
Thank you for all this really great information. This has been really enriching. Like I said in the beginning, GLOW is about awareness, advocacy, and action. And what this has done is brought awareness. And like you said, all you can do is give people the information and allow them to, see for themselves where they need to go. And so this has been really, really wonderful to be able to speak with you. We will definitely be keeping in touch and keeping updated with the information as it comes out, since this is an ongoing project. Just thank you again for your time. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in and watching this. So that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Kenyatta, for having me. And again, you guys reach out. This is living and breathing, and we are happy to have you all as community members walking alongside us in this journey.
Okay,